Hello everyone and welcome to your week 10 lecture on food allergies and intolerances. So we'll get started. So yes, you have a couple of pre-readings. So please go through your pre-readings. All right, and then I'll be starting from here. So firstly, I'll be covering your two main types of allergy. You have immunoglobulin E mediated allergy and you have non-immunoglobulin E mediated allergy. So now for immunoglobulin E mediated allergy, the flow chart or the pathophysiological mechanism is available to you as a Word document. All right, so I'll just share the Word document with you. Just bear with me. All right, so guys, this is the Word document. So I'll just make sure that it's been shared. All right, so you can follow what I'm saying. All right, it was a pretty big one, so it was difficult to put it on a PowerPoint slide. So now guys, this is your immunoglobulin E mediated food allergy. All right, so as you will be seeing in your pre-readings, allergic reactions, they trigger your immune system. Food intolerances, they don't trigger your immune system. Allergic reaction triggers your immune system. And when your immune system is triggered, you may have two pathways. You may have a immunoglobulin E mediated pathway, or else you may have a non-immunoglobulin E mediated pathway. So now the immunoglobulin E mediated pathway generally happens, for instance, if you have specific proteins, for instance, which are present in peanuts. All right, so a peanut allergy in simple terms is immunoglobulin E mediated allergy. So just I'll scroll down. So this is an FYI. Oh, I thought I had written it over here. Okay, so basically, I'll write it over here again for you guys when I submit this on Canvas. All right, so there are specific type of proteins which are present in your peanuts, and they are responsible for causing the allergic reaction. All right, so now when I say allergic food component, all right, antigen. So these proteins which are present in peanut, they are considered to be antigen. So please remember, antigen is something protein in nature. All right, and this protein, for example, the protein which is present in peanut, and the specific type of protein, the name of the protein, I'll be sharing that with you. And yes, that is just an FYI. You don't need to remember the specific type of name of protein which is there in peanut which is causing the allergy. All right, I want you to understand the concept. The concept over here is, when a individual who's allergic to peanuts eats peanut, there are certain type of proteins in these peanuts, and the body considers them as antigen. All right, so your antigens are protein, and antigen basically meaning your body is considering those protein as alien in nature. All right, something foreign and something which the body should not accept. So that is how your body is perceiving this protein, which is termed as antigen. So antigen is a foreign protein which your body doesn't want to accept. Okay, so basically what happens is that this triggers, so when your body senses an antigen, it triggers your T helper 2 cell memory. Okay, so this is T2 cell. In short form, I'll just call it as T2 cell. The full form of TH2 is T helper 2 cell. All right, so it triggers your T helper 2 cell memory. All right, and basically your T helper 2 cell, it sees this protein as an antigen. Okay, it perceives this protein as an antigen, meaning something foreign which shouldn't be there in your body. And this T2 cell, it activates your B cells. All right, so if you remember your immunity, which I had spoken about in your very early lecture, maybe it was in the diabetes lecture. All right, so you know how you had your lymphocytes, they had T cells and B cells. So these are those B cells which I'm talking about. Okay, so your B cells are activated, and as I had taught in that lecture, and I think it was the diabetes lecture, that your B cells, they will release specific antibodies. All right, and the one which it releases in the largest amount is your immunoglobulin E antibody. All right, so that is what it releases. Now, on the other hand, you have T cells which are being activated. Your T cells, basically, they are, they are releasing cytokines, and the cytokine type which is seen most predominantly in the blood, all right, is your interleukin. Okay, so that is the thing which I'm saying. T cells releasing cytokines, the type of cytokines being interleukin. All right, so yes, this is how your immune system is activated because the protein in the peanut was perceived as an antigen. All right, so now what does your immunoglobulin E do? All right, so your antibody immunoglobulin E, it attaches to a mast cell. All right, so a mast cell is type of a WBC. Okay, so it attaches to your mast cell, and your mast cell then releases a lot of inflammatory compounds such as various cytokines, leukotrienes, prostaglandins, and in very large proportion histamine. So you will see when you do blood test, you will definitely see histamine in these individuals' blood, and which is say a red flag, a biomarker, an indicator that an allergic reaction has occurred. All right. So yes, when you have all of these inflammatory compounds being released, you know, these are interleukin, your these two sort of cytokines, they are also inflammatory in nature, and therefore you have an allergic inflammatory reaction, meaning you have skin rashes or throat constriction, or else you have abdominal cramps. So basically you have an anaphylactic reaction. All right, so this anaphylactic reaction, meaning you have all of these signs and symptoms, okay, which you see in anaphylactic patients. All right, so yes, basically that is what I want to explain to you over here, that it's a very simple mechanism. The biggest biomarkers being histamine, all right, and your biggest thing being immunoglobulin E, which is released in the largest concentration by the B cell, which attaches to the mast cell. So these are the key golden points which you need to remember. And rest assured, guys, when I submit this Word document on Canvas, I'll make sure I add in those proteins which you find in peanut, which are generally inflammatory in nature. So that is just going to be an FYI for you. All right, so yep, that's it for this one. Okay, so now we'll switch back to our slides. Okay, so yes, immunoglobulin E mediated reaction, for example, peanut allergy. All right, and you saw the Word document. Guys, the flow chart which I showed you, this is a diagrammatic form of the flow chart. Okay, so you have this mast cell, for example. All right, and your mast cell, then it releases those inflammatory compounds. Okay, and then you have all of these reactions: itching, swelling, nausea, vomiting, cramps, so on and so forth. Okay, so yes, guys, I hope this makes sense. But basically, in this flowchart, what I found, it is not as clearly written as like this diagram doesn't have that clarity. So I thought I'll make it as a flowchart for those individuals who may not understand this. Okay, so but yes, so that is your very simple immunoglobulin E mediated allergy. So basically, this is what happens in the body when you have a peanut allergy and you have an anaphylactic reaction. All right. So now, guys, we'll move on to say your gluten allergy. All right. So where which is called as celiac disease as well. All right. So individuals who cannot tolerate gluten, and I'm not talking about the fad which is going on that, oh, let's go on a gluten-free diet, even though we can digest gluten for no specific reason. That's just random and weird. If you can digest gluten, you should be eating that gluten. The more you let your intestine work, the stronger will be your immunity. Don't just avoid things because it's fashionable. Okay, so yes, that's just my dietitian aura coming out. Okay, so yes, guys, so you have gluten in a lot of your wheat products, all right, which we know. All right, and these are the things which doesn't have gluten. So this is just an FYI for you. It's a very simple slide. You can go through it. Okay. So yes, basically no wheat allowed is the big thumb rule for gluten allergy or celiac disease, because you don't want the allergy which the individual has is big towards the gluten protein. So gluten again is a type of protein. All right. So now what happens in a non-immunoglobulin E mediated allergy? So guys, please remember, your gluten allergy is your non-immunoglobulin E mediated allergy. Okay. So your celiac disease is your non-IgE mediated allergy. So now, for example, you have eaten wheat. So meaning you have eaten gluten. All right. So gluten gets broken down in the body into two type of proteins. You have gliadin and glutenin. All right. So the main allergy, which say 70 to 80% of the patient population they have, that is towards the gliadin. All right. So that is the say protein molecule they are allergic towards. All right, so now what happens in the body, guys, is your gliadin, it gets deaminated, okay, meaning it is a removal of your ammonia group. All right, so this is by the enzyme trans-glutaminase. All right, and this is a deamination process, okay, meaning you're removing the ammonia group from gliadin. All right, so now this deaminated gliadin is perceived as an antigen in your body. Okay, so now you know antigen is a protein, but which is perceived as a foreign, as an alien, and the body thinks this is not right. Okay, so yes, your body recognizes gliadin as an antigen only when the individual has these specific genes. Okay, and you don't need to remember the gene code, which is HLA, DQ2 and DQ8. You don't need to remember that. Okay, but basically, yes, if you do have a short answer, then you'll have to write that there are these specific genes which would be, say, triggering this. So yes, guys, as you have read in your pre-reading, you don't really know the underlying reasons for allergies and intolerances. Okay, but yes, it is said to be highly genetic in nature. And with allergies, there are these specific genes which have been identified to be associated with an allergic reaction. Okay, so if individual is carrying the DQ2 and DQ8 gene, then yes, they are more likely to say have gluten allergy, and their body recognizing gliadin as your antigen. Okay, so now what happens, guys, is now when your body thinks that, oh, gliadin is in me and this is an antigen, this will activate your T1 cells. Okay, so remember, T1 cell is to do with non-IgE mediated allergy, and then you have your T2 cells, which is to do with IgE mediated allergy. Okay, so that is the big difference. All right, so now your T1 cell is activated and it senses this as an antigen, which is your gliadin. All right, so what does T1 cell do? It does the same thing, which is it will activate your B cells. All right, your B cells will release antibodies, and the antibodies which are most commonly found in a non-IgE mediated allergy is your anti-gliadin antibodies and your anti-transglutaminase. All right, so these are the antibodies which are released. And then you have on the other side where your T cell is activated, T cell releases cytokine. The most common cytokine is your interleukin. All right, and the other one which you see also is tumor necrosis factor. Now, all of this, as you know, they are inflammatory compounds, they are inflammatory molecule. All right, so they are going to cause inflammatory damage. And as you know, gluten has to do a lot with intestine, right? So the main damage which you see, the main, say, a clinical sign which you see is the damage of your intestinal brush border. All right, this is called as villus atrophy. All right, meaning your brush border is not brushy anymore, it's becoming really flat. Okay, so the other thing which it causes, guys, is that it decreases your transforming growth factor beta. All right, so this is TGF beta. Very important to know this term, transforming growth factor beta, because a lot of, if say you're working as a allergy specialist dietitian, you will be seeing these terminologies in the blood test results. Okay, so yes, you have low transforming growth factor beta, and this is very important, guys, transforming growth factor beta, because it increases your tolerance. Now, I'm not talking about food intolerance in that sense. Basically, it increases the body's acceptance for gliadin and not recognize this as an antigen. Okay, so your body is more accepting. So it decreases your, say, sensitivity to these proteins. All right, it increases tolerance to these proteins. Okay, so this terminology tolerance which I'm using is in this say perspective, which is it is more accepting of these kind of proteins such as gliadin. Okay, in simple terms. All right, so yes, guys, so basically this is your function for non-immunoglobulin E mediated allergic reaction. All right. So guys, this is your villus atrophy. So you see over here, it's nice brush border, meaning increasing surface area of your small intestine, therefore increasing absorption. But this is your damaged villus atrophy, all right? So this impairs the absorption of various other nutrients as well. Okay, so this is how a histological section looks. All right, so now testing for allergy. So now, guys, it is much more easier to identify if an individual is suffering from allergy in comparison to intolerances. Why? Because you have, say, it's very easy to do a blood test. And if you have those biomarkers, they are strong indicators that an individual may having XYZ allergy. Okay, so allergy testing much more easier compared to identifying intolerances. All right, so yes, you would be testing for serum antibodies such as your immunoglobulin E, A, G, all right, things like that. The other thing which is done, the first thing which is done is a skin prick test. If the skin prick test is say positive, then the say doctor will suggest go for a blood test as well. All right. So now what is a skin prick test? This is how it is. So on one side you put water drops. On the other side you put actually the antigen with the body is say allergic to. Okay, so it could be say gliadin, or else it could be those specific proteins which are there in the peanut. Okay, so those kind of things. Then you scratch the skin. All right, and then if it has this wheal and flare sort of a rash, all right, meaning the individual is allergic to that thing. And the control group, your control group being water, it is just red because you are scratching the skin, but it is not giving you that wheal flare sort of a reaction. Okay, so when this is positive, then the individual is sent for further blood testing. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, guys. All right, so now we talk about the most common type of intolerance. You have your lactose intolerance. Now, the only say exception is that it is easy to identify if an individual is suffering from lactose intolerance. All right, why? We'll come to that very soon. So now in your body, lactose is broken down to glucose and galactose. All right, so and this is done with the presence of the enzyme lactase. So for you and me who do not have lactose intolerance, this is how our body functions. So now in individuals who have lactose intolerance, they do not have sufficient amount of the enzyme lactase. So for example, they can tolerate yogurt but not say milk, or else if they have no lactase, then this means they can't even tolerate yogurt and things like that. All right, so the degree of intolerance depends upon the amount of enzyme you're secreting. And intolerances, there are such crazy determinants. It is not just say genetics and things. For example, with age, it may so happen that the efficiency with which you are say secreting lactase is diminished. Okay, so with age, some individuals develop say intolerance to drinking large amounts of milk. Okay, so that happens as well. There are certain ethnic populations who may be at higher risk as well. So with lactose intolerance, there are a lot of permutation combinations. All right, so yes, so basically what happens, guys, so when your lactose cannot be broken down into glucose and galactose, so as you can see from this, lactose being your disaccharide, glucose galactose being your monosaccharide, so what is absorbed in the blood is your glucose and galactose, but this is not happening. All right, so yes, you have your lactose as your disaccharide, and so it is say just as it is, okay, as a disaccharide, it goes into the large intestine and your bacteria starts fermenting the lactose. All right, so you have this abdominal bloating, cramps, diarrhea, or say bouts of diarrhea and constipation. All right, and basically the stools which are there, they are very I can't pronounce this word well, but frothy in nature. Okay, so they are very foamy. Okay, yeah, they are very foamy. All right, why are they foamy? Because lactose is fermented, and that is how it is eliminated from the body. Okay, so the stools are very foamy-ish in nature. All right, so you we just call as frothy. I don't know. There are just some words which I can't pronounce. I don't know why. Okay, but you get the meaning. All right. So now, why can you tolerate yogurt? For example, those who have mild lactose intolerance can tolerate yogurt, but not say milk, because your bacteria in your yogurt, which is a probiotic, okay, so it has already converted a large amount of lactose into lactic acid. All right, so you do not need the enzyme lactase then. Okay, so it has already done that breaking down for you. All right, so yes, that's why yogurt could be more tolerated, and cheese is also low in lactose, okay, because of the fermentation, because cheese is also a fermented product. So yes, therefore it is well tolerated by some individuals. But as I said, there is a lot of determinants going on over here. It is not just about say some people who may have say a genetics going, or it could be age also, it could be ethnicity also. It could be something so funny, geographical also. For instance, when I was, you know, like I have studied, say, I've done my schooling in Dubai, right? And then I was doing my undergrad, say, in India. And all, Dubai and India, I could totally tolerate milk and everything, no issues. When I came to Australia, I found it difficult to like tolerate milk. And then for my postdoc, when I went to US, I could completely tolerate milk over there, like no issues. And now I'm like, means after returning from the US, I gradually had to train my body to tolerate milk over here. And the milk which I can tolerate is the A2 milk, which is more digestible protein compared to the normal, like the other sort of milk. So yes, it's funny that how I have this thing in Australia, but I don't have it in other continents of the world. Okay, so it's funny, but yeah, it is what it is. So as I said, with intolerances, there are so many determinants. It is not a is equal to B. It is not as clean as allergies. Okay, with allergies, predominant issue is genetics, and you have your blood biomarkers and things are clear. But yeah, intolerance is a lot of gray areas. All right. So yes, so you have lactose, as I said, intolerance is very easy to say identify compared to other sort of intolerances because of the hydrogen breath test. Okay, so when your lactose, it just goes to your large intestine as it is, and when it's fermented by the bacteria, this fermentation process, it releases a lot of hydrogen, and this hydrogen comes out of your breath. All right, so you have those foamy stools and all of that, but what they do is a hydrogen breath test. And for example, if say you have very, very high levels of hydrogen in your breath, meaning your lactose is not being digested, because for you and me, where lactose is digested, we would not be having a lot of hydrogen in our breath. Okay, so basically, guys, this is the test which is used for detecting intolerances with lactose. All right, so I hope this is clear. It's pretty simple. So now you have, for example, your fructose and fructose polymer intolerances. Now this is a big headache. All right, this is very, very challenging, and it is very, very challenging for the patients as well, like the poor patients. So many permutations and combination going on, they become really tired because there are bajillion foods, and of which they could be, say, allergic to 2 food or 10 food, and you have to identify those. So it's a very tiring process. It's a very sympathetic process for the patients. Of course, it is challenging for the dietitian as well. But yes, the poor patient who's suffering from this requires a lot of patience. So yeah, the patient requires a lot of patience. All right, so guys, the fructose intolerance, basically it is called as FODMAP. All right, so you have fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide polyols. Okay, so that is the full form of it. All right, so now we'll go through each one of these. And guys, I won't go into your food science, but as you know, monosaccharide, glucose, galactose, disaccharide, like you have your lactose, oligosaccharides where you have more than 2 molecules, and then a fermentable, meaning anything which can be fermented in the large intestine. All right, and polyols are your sugar alcohols. Okay, so your oligosaccharides are like your fructans, inulin, all of those as well. Okay, so oh yes, so I have written it over here for you, which is good. All right, so yes, so you have your say your fructose, your monosaccharides. So individuals could be, say, intolerant towards say high fructose corn syrup, or else say fruits which are very, very high in fructose, because as you know, with fruits you have fruit sugar, so that's how you remember it: F for fruit and F for fruit sugar. All right, which is fructose. All right, so yes, so you have your apples, mangoes, pears, for example, very high in fructose. They may not be able to tolerate this. All right, so, and of course your honey also. All right, then you have your fructans, like your oligosaccharides, okay, and they are fermentable as well. So your fructans, for example, they are present in your artichoke, garlic, leek, spring onion, shallots. See, it's so difficult. That is what, like the poor patient, like, you have to follow basically an elimination diet. And why I'm so sympathetic for it, because can you imagine, you maybe say, say having, not allergic, sorry, that is not the right word. So you maybe say having intolerance towards, say, spring onions and leeks, okay, which you wouldn't like really imagine. And sometimes guys, their diets are so restricted because they can't have these X specific number of pulses and, say, veggies and fruits. So the diet becomes very restricted as well. And it is much more challenging to say support them to have a nutritionally balanced diet with the limited, say, options that they can consume. All right. So yes, so those are your oligosaccharides. Okay, your fructans, which are present in wheat, barley, rye, inulin, all of those, as I said. Then your lactose also falls in this category as disaccharides. Then you have your galacto-oligosaccharides, which are fermentable. So basically, they do a lot of fermentation in your large intestine. And then you have your polyols. The biggest source is your, say, your artificial sweeteners, okay, like your mannitol, xylitol, sorbitol. Okay, all of these are your polyols. Okay, so they are present in your, say, your sugar-free gums and things like that. Okay, and polyols, of course, they are also present in a lot of, say, seed fruit. Okay, like your plums, prunes, pears, and things like that, nectarine and things. Okay, so yes, they are present practically everywhere. Okay, a lot of your fruits, as you can see, if you just look at this, if you take a step back and if you look at this, your fruit as a food group is covered. Your veggie group is also covered to a very large extent. Your dairy is covered, milk and milk products. Your vegan protein is covered. All right. So yes, these diets are very challenging. And yes, it is, therefore, you have dietitians who specialize in food allergies and intolerances as part of their practice. All right. So yes, guys, as I said, you don't need to go into the details of elimination diet because you're not a dietitian. All right. So I'll just give you a brief overview about this for your undergraduate or, your basic postgraduate level. So yes, elimination diet, as I said, they are generally, basically what they do is you maintain something like this. Let me go to a next slide. Okay. So this is the kind of, say, a diary which you maintain. All right. And then you have, say, you eliminate, say, around 1 to 2 foods for, say, around 4 weeks or 12 weeks. It depends. Like, this is very, very individualistic. There is no one golden rule. All right. And you eliminate that food in all forms. So for example, if you have, say, your peas, okay, which has fructans, for example. So now peas you will eliminate, or corn you will eliminate in your fresh form and in your frozen form as well. Okay, in every form possible. All right. As I said, yes, elimination diet is highly individualized, and you will eliminate, say, the food product in all forms. Maybe, say, a major ingredient or a minor ingredient. Okay, you don't want anything to do with it. Why? Because you want to see if you remove that, does your signs and symptoms improve? And generally, with intolerances, the signs and symptoms are more GI in nature: abdominal cramp, bloating, nausea. Not generally vomiting, but it could also be at times. But yes, a lot of GI issues with intolerances. Okay, like with say, allergic reactions, your say, your symptoms are more life-threatening in nature because they are say they induce anaphylactic reactions. Okay, so when you have constriction of your throat and things like that. In intolerances, a lot of symptoms are more GI in nature. Okay. All right, guys. So allergy prevention. So basically the main aim is, which is to decrease your sensitivity to, say, certain type of, say, allergic, say, protein molecules. For example, those proteins which are present in peanut, or else, say, the protein, say, your gliadin, which is present in your, say, wheat. All right. So yes, your main aim is to decrease sensitivity and to increase acceptance. Okay. So what has research shown? So there is this one big hypothesis which is going on, which is called as environmental food exposure. So let me show you this diagram. So do you see this cutaneous exposure? So cutaneous exposure is your skin exposure. All right. So food exposed via inflamed skin. The catchword over here is inflamed. Okay. The skin being inflamed. And then you have oral exposure. So basically, let me just roughly tell you first. The theory says if you expose your allergic food products, such as, say, your peanuts and your milk and your eggs and your shellfish and your soy and things like that, orally, the infant in the long run will be less likely to develop allergic reaction to those protein molecules in these specific foods. Okay, because the exposure is via oral route. That is where the food should be coming in, via oral route. All right. And this will increase the tolerance of your T1 memory cell. It will increase the tolerance of your T1 memory cell, meaning less likely to cause non-IgE mediated allergic reaction, meaning less likely to say, develop allergic reactions such as say, gluten allergy. All right. So it increases the tolerance of your T1 memory cell, meaning your T1 memory cell will not look at gluten and say, oh, this is a antigen, let me start attacking it. No, it will be more accepting of this. All right. So that is say basically, and do you see your TGF beta, which we spoke about? So it increases your TGF beta, meaning food is the protein is more accepted. It is not perceived as an antigen. Now, on the other hand, if you have cutaneous food exposure, meaning your skin is inflamed, and say if you are rubbing peanut oil on it, or say some sort of say cream which has say ingredients of egg proteins and say milk proteins and things like that, basically what is the school of thought telling you? That you have these protein molecules which are present in food ingredients such as your milk, or maybe your say peanuts or your eggs, maybe in form of oils or creams or lotions. Okay, this is coming via inflamed skin. Firstly, the biggest sign when your skin is inflamed, maybe you had a scratch, maybe the baby had a mosquito bite, whatever it is. Okay, the skin is inflamed, meaning the skin is not healthy. The body's immune system is already activated, because the body wants to send your platelets over there to start stitching the skin back. The body immune system is activated to see that there are no bacteria or any such sort of pathogens coming via that open inflamed skin. Okay, so your body's immune system is already on high alert because it is inflamed. Your skin is inflamed. And now on top of that, you're having the baby, you're putting say oils and lotions and creams which have food ingredients in it. Okay, so milk proteins in it, or say peanut protein in it, egg protein in it, and things like that. Okay, so basically what is this saying? This activates your T2 cell memory. Okay, meaning when your T2 cell memory is activated, basically your T2 cell memory thinks that, why am I getting food via the skin? Meaning these proteins are bad. These proteins are entering via the inflamed skin. So they must be coming in the body to do something bad. So it starts recognizing this as an antigen. All right, and therefore you will be more likely, the baby will be more likely to develop allergic reactions in the future. Now when your T2 cell is memory cell is activated, so what does this mean? Highly likely to develop your IgE mediated allergic reactions like your peanut allergy. All right, and the same sort of research was done. There are individual studies to show the same. Of course, as I said, there is a lot more research needed. This is a school of thought. This is still at the hypothesis stage. It is not that it is level 1 evidence or anything like that. Okay, so now this is the say the research study which I wanted to share with you guys. So basically, so there the environmental food exposure, the study is say tested on a lot of animal models, limited human models. But what was seen in say one prospective cohort study, meaning a longitudinal long-term study, is that when the babies were applied something which is called as Arachis oil, which has peanut say peanut protein molecule as the main ingredient, on inflamed skin again. Okay, so that is the catch over here. Inflamed skin, these babies were at a high risk of developing peanut allergy at 5 years of age. So when these babies were eating peanuts, they were very likely to develop say these anaphylactic reactions. And at 5 years of age, because now the T2 cell T2 memory cell thinks, oh okay, these proteins came via the skin, now these proteins are coming via the gut, these are antigens, let me start attacking it. Okay, so basically that is the theory behind this. All right, so then you have basically over here, the other model is showing that when in a randomized control trial, when you had babies who were introduced peanuts as early as 4 months onward. Okay, so maybe at 4 months or 5 months or 6 months and beyond. Of course, now we are not debating about exclusive breastfeeding. We all know that babies should be breastfed till 6 months of age, okay, exclusively. But yes, this is like, you know, it's not that in a randomized control trial, the researchers said, you have to start feeding your baby at 4 months. No, it is those mothers who had an independent choice of feeding their baby from 4 months of age. That is how they were randomized, if that makes sense. Okay, so yes, so you had these babies who were given peanuts, say from 4 months onwards and beyond. Now these babies at 5 years of age were very likely they were less likely to develop peanut allergy. Okay, because in this condition, you had the T1 memory cell, which was tolerant okay, which recognize this as, oh, this had come into my system from the oral tract. This is not an antigen. The immune system doesn't need to worry about it. T2 cell, chillax, this is okay. This is something which we can accept. Let it proceed. Okay, so basically it proceeded the border. Okay, so it is like border control. There was no activation of immune system and all was good. All right, so basically this is, say, these are the big studies, the LEAP and LEAP-ON studies, which are done to show the hypothesis of environmental food exposure. Okay, so yes, guys, again, with in the area of allergy and intolerances, if you see, the research is still much more new compared to, say, research in the area of obesity or diabetes or CBD. Okay, so we'll have to appreciate these evidences are not your level 1 evidence. There are high quality evidence such as your randomized control trial prospective cohort study, but of course you cannot classify them as level 1 because there is still a lot more research needed to prove this same point multiple number of times in various, say, equations. Okay, so now I won't talk about research models over here because that is more of an epidemiology sort of a unit. Okay, so now you have, say, your breastfeeding. So of course, breastfeeding, as you know, it's one of the best, say, there is a lot of research which says that yes, breastfeeding can protect the baby against, say, things such as inflammatory bowel conditions in the future. Okay, like your ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, asthma. Less research to show that breastfeeding can protect against, say, dermatitis, like, say, skin issues. All right, but yes, there is a lot of mixed research, but nobody can deny that breastfeeding has a lot of, say, health benefits. And one of the health benefits being that, yes, it can decrease the risk of, say, the baby developing allergies in the future. Okay, potentially decrease the risk of it. All right, so yes, why can it decrease the risk of it? Because the babies, the baby which drinks mother's milk, the breast milk has a lot of, say, immunological properties. Like you have your T cells, B cells, lymphocytes, which are coming via the breast milk. All right, so they're immunity promoting. You have your immunoglobulins. Okay, and then you have, say, your prebiotics. So your milk is like a prebiotic, okay, because it has bifidus factor, meaning it will go inside the gut and it will stimulate the production of healthy bacteria. That is a prebiotic. Okay, then you have your lactoferrins, like which increases iron absorption, nutrients. So yes, there are a lot of healthy beneficial factors for your breastfeeding. Okay, when a mom is breastfeeding. All right, then the other thing which has shown to support minimizing the risk of allergies in children who are at, say, a very high risk of allergy. So if they are genetically at a very high risk of developing XYZ allergy, if the children are fed hydrolyzed protein formulas rather than intact protein formulas, okay, this would, say, minimize the risk of allergy. So this is again few studies which are showing this. All right, so yes, partially hydrolyzed protein, all elemental protein, okay, because it is easier for the baby's gut to digest this and not think of this as an antigen, okay, the breakdown of the protein, because the breakdown of the protein is already happening in the hydrolyzed formula and the baby is being fed. So basically, guys, what does hydrolyzed formula mean? You have intact proteins, and in hydrolyzed formula, these proteins are broken down into amino acids. So what the baby is having is automatic amino acids. Okay, so there are partially hydrolyzed and completely hydrolyzed formula. Completely hydrolyzed formula meaning you have no intact proteins, but you have all of your say protein is in the form of amino acids. Partially hydrolyzed, it could be, say, part of your formula is intact protein and part is, say, elemental in nature, meaning where you have the broken down of your amino acids. Okay, so that is what is meant by hydrolyzed formula. Okay, then you have complementary feeding. Again, a lot of mixed school of thoughts. What has been seen that if you start feeding the baby very, very early, meaning, say, probably even less than 3 months of age, solid introduction of food is done. This may increase the risk of early eczema, dermatitis, and things like that. All right. Similarly, say when you are feeding the baby, say delaying the complementary feeding, so not starting at 6 months, but maybe say at 9 months and 10 months, this can also increase the risk of allergy. So either ways, early introduction or late introduction, both of them have shown to potentially increase the risk of allergies in babies. okay, in the long run. All right, then you have your prebiotics and your probiotics. So with your probiotics, as you know, they are, say, healthy bacteria is present in the food, like how you have your yogurt, okay, and you have lactobacillus, which is present in your yogurt. Then you have your prebiotic. All right, so prebiotic, basically, these foods go inside the intestine and they start, they trigger the production of healthy bacteria. These are called as your prebiotics, okay? So they are, say, dietary fiber sort of foods, like you have your pulses, your legumes, and then you have resistant starch. You may have learned of resistant starch in food science. If not, look it up, okay? And I think I even spoke about resistant starch in your CVD lecture. All right, so yes, you have these sort of, say, prebiotic food which will promote the generation of, say, short chain saturated fatty acid. We spoke about this in the CVD lecture. And prebiotics and probiotics have shown to play a role in decreasing the, say, risk of development of allergies. All right. So how? Basically, it decreases the risk of allergy development. It strengthens your non-immunoglobulin E and immunoglobulin E mediated immunity, meaning it increases the memory of your T1 and T2 memory cells. Therefore, it does not recognize, say, a protein as an antigen. Okay, so that is what the mechanism is. The other mechanism is that it promotes the synthesis of your transforming growth factor beta. Okay, as you know, this again will increase your tolerance to, say, proteins which can be potentially considered as antigens. All right, then you have again the evidence. Of course, always remember, guys, in this area of allergy and intolerances, the evidence is quite mixed. Okay, so yes, what has been seen that prebiotics and probiotics, it could be useful in cases such as eczema, dermatitis, but not very much useful in, say, asthma, wheezing, or, say, anaphylactic, say, sort of reactions. Okay, but say any allergies which are, say, concerning, say, causing itchy skin and eczema, in that prebiotics, probiotics may help. All right, the combination of prebiotics and probiotics is called as symbiotics. So you have a lot of symbiotics, say, foods in the market. You have a lot of these, say, say, orange juice, which, say, are fiber rich because they have fiber added to it. And then they have your probiotics added to it as well, meaning healthy bacteria. And they are promoted as symbiotics. Okay, so that is what symbiotics mean. All right, so then you have, for example, omega-3 that has also shown to decrease the risk of allergy. How? Because omega-3, it produces eicosanoids, as you know, your thromboxanes, leukotrienes, and prostaglandins. And this was from your mental health lecture, which decreases inflammation. Okay. And the other thing which it does is that it say, decreases your immunoglobulin E mediated allergic risk, meaning it strengthens the memory of your T2 helper cell. All right. What does that mean? It means that it will say, not recognize those proteins as antigens, all right, like peanuts. Okay, then vitamin D. Again, as I said, vitamin D, it has an immunomodulatory role, and that's why vitamin D is the only nutrient we consider as a hormone. Okay, so yes, we spoke a lot about vitamin D's immunomodulatory role in your mental health lectures. Therefore, I have made all of these references if you don't remember. Okay, so yes, again, as you know, vitamin D, it reduces your overall inflammation. All right, and it strengthens your non-immunoglobulin E and immunoglobulin E mediated immunity, meaning it strengthens the memory of both T1 and T2 helper cells, and therefore they do not recognize these proteins as antigens. Okay, so yes, guys, these are your nutrients. Oh, wow. See, as I said, as we progress in the semester, your lectures become shorter and shorter, because the biggest chunk where the extensive amount of research is done, see your CVDs, diabetes, obesity, all of that, that I covered in the first half of the semester. So like by the time you come to your final exams, all of that is revision and all of that is not new to you. So I did not keep very complicated lectures to the end of your semester, because that wouldn't be nice. Okay, and I don't want to be bad to you. Okay, it's not nice to be mean. So yes, guys, so that's why short lectures where the research is much more new, those are the ones which I cover at the end of things. Okay, so yes, you will be having your regular tutes for this week, and I'll be seeing you, all of you, in your tute. Okay, and yes, your next lecture is your PKU lecture, and this next lecture is the last lecture which will be included in your final exam. Okay, so your final exam has everything from week 1 till PKU. Okay, then you have your GI lecture, which is the very, very last, which is in week 12, I think. That is not part of your assessment. It won't come in your final exam because that is very close to exam and I don't want to burden you with that. Okay. So you just have these two new lectures, guys, food allergies and PKU, as part of new lectures that you have to learn for your final exam. Everything else you have already learned. Okay. So yes, that's it from my end, and I'll see you very soon in your tutes. So thank you.